My name is Bruce Walker, and I have the privilege of serving as Dean of MU's College of Business. Thank you for joining us today for the first Dean's Distinguished Lecture of 2006-2007. The Dean's Distinguished Lecture, and more broadly, our college's speaker series, is intended to enrich the educational experience of our students and also to keep our faculty and members of the business community abreast of important developments in the business world and more specifically in leading companies. Our speaker today comes to us from Caterpillar, Inc., and I mentioned leading companies. The September 25th issue of Business Week has an extensive article about the remanufacturing endeavors of Caterpillar, a major article, and I think today's speaker will at least touch upon that in his talk. So we talk about prominent executives from leading companies, and not coincidentally, there's a big article about Caterpillar in the issue of Business Week. We try to extend invitations for the Dean's Distinguished Lecture to our most prominent alumni, and I think that today's speaker definitely meets that, what we think is a stringent criterion. Now, before I provide an introduction, let me risk offending you with a couple reminders. Assure that your cell phone is turned off. I need to do that as I go to my seat, in fact. And please stay until the conclusion not only of the talk, but what's always a very informative and interesting Q&A session. And we will pledge to have you out of here by 4:30, 4:45 at the latest. I am really delighted that Ed Rapp accepted my invitation to present a Dean's Distinguished Lecture. The first step toward Mr. Rapp being here today occurred several years ago, maybe as long ago as 4 or 5 years ago, when he contacted me from, if I recall correctly, Geneva, Switzerland, after he received the college's alumni magazine, or maybe it was some electronic message from me. He said at that time that he would like to be involved with, re-engaged with his alma mater, but there was the matter of great distance from Geneva to Columbia. He said when he returned to the States, to the mainland, that he would like to get re-engaged, and sure enough, when that occurred, he contacted me. Last February, Ed Rapp served as Professor Frede. In that role, he taught a couple of classes and met with students informally, and I can tell you, at the risk of embarrassing him, that he impressed our students and faculty a great deal. So we said we have to get him back to campus as soon as possible again, and we're delighted that he came today. Earlier, he had an executive luncheon with 3 of our students, and just before this session, had an informal group discussion with a number of our MBA students. By way of brief introduction, and you should have Mr. Rapp's bio on the program for today's lecture, Mr. Rapp earned his undergraduate degree in finance from MU in 1979. Later, he completed the Executive Development Program at the University of Illinois. Immediately after graduation from Mizzou, he joined Caterpillar as a price analyst. He's had a very distinguished career at Caterpillar, and I think there's much more to come. Ultimately, he's managed several aspects of Caterpillar's North American commercial division. He also has had extensive international experience as he worked with Caterpillar overseas in Johannesburg and also Geneva, beginning in 1993, and then rising to the position of Vice President of the Europe, Africa, Middle East Marketing Division in 2000. Mr. Rapp is now the Vice President of the Building Construction Products Division for Caterpillar. The format for today's session is quite simple. Following Mr. Rapp's talk, we'll have time for questions and answers, and then we will adjourn to room 105 for a reception. Ladies and gentlemen, it's really a great pleasure for me to introduce Ed Rapp to present today's Dean's Distinguished Lecture titled Positive Leadership in What Can Be a Negative World. Mr. Rapp.
Thank you. If you guys don't mind, I'm going to take the jacket off. There's something about being in a university setting that wearing a sport coat didn't quite feel right. When I got the email in terms of this event, I'll have to admit, I appreciate the reminder to shut off the mobile phone, so I did that. But I picked this up on my BlackBerry overseas and did a quick read and thought I'll come back and do a similar session like I did with Art and some of the students last time. It really wasn't until I looked through my material on the trip here that I figured out that maybe I'd graduated beyond the small circle that I'd had last time. So hopefully this will be an engaging session for you. I am really pleased to be back here. The one thing I did try to do in terms of the topic, though, is to come at it from an angle that maybe is not your traditional corporate view in terms of the world. I could have come with a standard presentation on Caterpillar and I'm sure bored you to tears in spite of the fact that I have a great passion for the company. So the topic is a bit different in terms of positive leadership in what can be a negative world. And I'll kind of take you through why I think that's an issue, especially for people like you that are growing into your leadership position, okay? By way of just a bit of background, this is kind of the bio. I start off with pre-Caterpillar. I figure Pilot Grove says a lot in that I'm proudly from a town of about 700 people, graduated from a class of 32 kids, and sat in my first class at the University of Missouri was a TV lecture in a hall like this. It was Middlebush. We didn't have it as well as you do. And I remember sitting in that chair thinking, what in the world have I gotten myself into? But those are my early days in terms of coming here. I'm one of 7 kids. I have 3 older brothers and 3 younger sisters. And I've professed through the years that I am the neglected middle child. And my mom has reminded me, with 7 kids, you're all neglected, okay? So I get no sympathy in terms of that. But it was a great foundation to come from in terms of Midwestern, strong family values, in terms of building the foundation. I think it ties very much into the topic of today's talk. And then the University of Missouri. It gave me an opportunity to do a lot of the things that you see on this list. And I'll really capsulize the history of Caterpillar. Left here in '79, went into their corporate headquarters in Peoria, Illinois, worked in various jobs between 1979 and the late 80s. In 1990, I went to San Francisco, responsible for state of California and Nevada in a district office. For those of you who remember that time, one of the major market developments was the first time that they developed airfare wars in the U.S. airline industry, in the time we were in San Francisco. So you could get discounted air travel tickets from the Midwest to the West Coast, and we had tons of company, almost every weekend. And I remember at the end of the summer of 1993, my wife said, when we leave San Francisco, I want to go somewhere where no one will come visit us. I came home 2 weeks later and I said, honey, I think I got your wish. We're going to Johannesburg, South Africa. And we went to Johannesburg 6 months before the free elections and the Mandela government. So we got to watch that society transform itself, if you would, from a controlled society to a majority rural society. From there, we moved to Geneva, Switzerland, and spent 9 years in Europe in various jobs. While the family spent, their time in Geneva, I had the great fortune and also the challenge in terms of traveling extensively throughout Europe, Africa, the Middle East, Central Asia, and the former Soviet Union. But it was 9 years that were an absolute blessing for us. And now we've come back closer to home. I run our building construction products division in Raleigh, North Carolina, and it's great to be back in terms of having access not only to family and friends, but also access for opportunities like this. So just a brief background to give you a little bit of a feel for how I've gotten to this point in time, okay? In terms of Caterpillar, this is a brief commercial break because this is also an opportunity for us to expose the company. Most of you probably know us in terms of the products that you see. We are one of the few companies that when there is a slowdown in traffic due to road construction, we're actually glad because it is typically Caterpillar product that's being used. In fact, our history goes back to the infrastructure development, road construction, those kinds of things. But these are some of the products that you'd see. In terms of the characteristics of our company, first of all, global. As you can see, 115 global manufacturing locations. And this is a part of the heritage of Caterpillar. It goes back to the very early days. We formed as a company in 1925, and that first year we had $14 million in sales, and the $14 million in sales went to 29 different countries in the world. So from the beginning, Caterpillar was a global company. And it was one of the things that really attracted me to the company. When the Caterpillar interviewer came on campus at the University of Missouri, back in 1979, I had the annual report. I was doing the same kind of preparation I'm sure you do for interviews. And it had a picture of all their locations around the world. And I said to the guy interviewing, is it really true that you can have an opportunity to go to these places and work in these places? And I've used his quote many times. A young man, Caterpillar is a company, if you work hard and apply yourself, you can see the world and get paid to do it. And as you've seen for 27 years, that's what I've been doing. But the global fabric of this company goes back to our founding fathers. Secondly, is we're a leader more than twice the size of our nearest competitor, and that's where we like to stay. We spend $4 million every working day in terms of research and development to make sure that we put more distance between us and our competitors. We love good competition. We just don't want them to be anywhere near the same size. And we spend a lot of money making sure that we keep that leadership position. But probably the most important way to maintain a leadership position is never to stop and take yourself too seriously. I think in today's competitive environment, you always have to be on edge. You always have to look at how do you get better. You always have to look for better ways to satisfy the needs of your customers. Next up is heritage, 50 consecutive years on the Fortune 500, 75 years on the New York Stock Exchange. There was a student in an earlier luncheon session that was actually going into his class to determine if they were going to buy Caterpillar stock in their class today, so I'll be anxious afterwards to get the answer if you did or not.
25 shares.
25 shares. This young man will be rich in the future, okay? And I'll show you why here in a minute. Next up, infrastructure development. This was the foundation, the building of the U.S. highway system, the reconstruction of Europe following World War II were two of the big projects that really put Caterpillar on the map. One of our favorite sayings is the one below, the road to progress begins with a road, period. And we take that very seriously in terms of the role we play in terms of the developing world. Another one is growth-oriented. A $22 billion company in 2003, a $40 billion company based on the outlook for 2006. So a good growth-oriented company. More than 300 products in our product line. But equally important is a major portfolio of services. About 2/3 of the product we sell around the world is financed by our Caterpillar Finance Company. An equal number where we provide extended warranties or insurance. We've taken our remanufacturing capability, such as the one referenced in the article from Dean Walker, and not only do we use it in terms of remanufacturing components for reuse in our equipment, but we've taken that capability and actually sell it on the outside. So we do remanufacturing into locomotives, we do remanufacturing into automobiles, And today, Caterpillar is the world's largest remanufacturer in any industry. Not only is it a great business, but it's also, from an environmental perspective, a great payback to society in terms of reclaim, reuse. Another business for us is logistics. If you go back and talk with customers through the years about what stood out about Caterpillar, it was probably related to the ability to get a part virtually to any location in the world within 24 hours. So if a machine went down and needed a part, we could get it there. What we've done with our logistics business is basically taken that capability and we sell it on the outside. We move parts in the US for Harley-Davidson. We move parts in Europe for Chrysler, Ford, and others. And we've turned it into a significant growth business, and it's part of our services portfolio. Progress Rail is a company we recently acquired. Services business that services the railroad systems in the US. It's a leader in that business, and we think we can leverage our global position to be able to take them to markets outside North America. On-highway trucks, if you see a major semi like you do on Interstate 70 running up and down, roughly 40% of them will have a Caterpillar engine in it. And then in terms of OEM solutions, if there's a garbage truck coming around the university today, chances are it could have Cat electronics or Cat hydraulics. One of the ways that we think you have to stay sharp in business to maintain a leadership position is to take things that you need to do internally in terms of manufacturing or design and sell that capability on the outside. It's a great quality check of, are you really competitive or not? So the services business are a big part of Caterpillar. Dealers, we sell our product through family dealerships in most cases. The average dealer has been with us more than 60 years, and it is probably our most significant competitive advantage. One way to measure it is that our dealers have twice the capital invested in the business than the next 4 competitors combined. And it's, if you turn to our competitors around the world and said, you can have any part of Caterpillar, which one do you pick? They probably pick our dealer organization. It's a great part of the Caterpillar family, a great part of our strength. And then lastly, a company of integrity. This is a hot topic today, and I'm sure in lectures you get into this issue in terms of governance and in the days of Enron and Tycos and WorldCom and Ahold and others. I guess the one reason that I'm really proud of Caterpillar is the concept of a code of conduct goes way back in our history. If you go to the inside cover of Caterpillar's 1966 annual report, it reads, signed by the chairman, we think it's in the best long-term interest of our employees and of our shareholders to conservatively manage our balance sheet. It's at the fabric of who Caterpillar is, the fabric in terms of the guys that have gone before me have built, and one that we really work to protect. So a little bit of a brief overview in terms of CAT. These are great numbers in terms of statements of what businesses we in. And the realities of today's world is it's what have you done for me lately in terms of putting the numbers on the board. This gives you a view of 03, 04, 05, and 06 in terms of sales and revenue, as well as earnings per share. That's one measure of performance. Another one would be in terms of the market and how it's measured it. And if you compare to the Dow average or the S&P 500, we've had a pretty good run through this period of time. That's why I'm so optimistic in terms of the individual who just bought 25 shares of CAT stock. Good background in terms of CAT, who we are as a company, our products, our services, and where we're at in terms of growing the business. You can get all this in our annual report, and it's an important document, especially in the environment we operate today in Sarbanes-Oxley and other, but equally important, if you really want to study and understand CAT, is to read our sustainability report. We talk openly about our annual report is today's work. Our sustainability, in terms of our commitment to the environment, is tomorrow's world. And I think responsible business has really got to engage in this field in terms of moving forward. And it's one that we have a very strong focus on in terms of not only reductions in greenhouse gases and responsibilities like that, but also growing our remanufacturing business and those other things that we think we can do in terms of making sure we do protect tomorrow's world. Now to the topic for today. Leadership is an ongoing quest. The picture that you see there is one that I use as a constant reminder that I stand before you today in growing into the shoes of what it means to be a leader. It's not a destination. It's not a place where, you know, I've done these jobs, I've graduated from this school, I've reached this position in the company, I am now officially arrived. I think leadership is something that is an ongoing, you know, journey, and one that I clearly understand I have a long way to go. So I want to preface my comments by saying I'm not here to talk about leadership from the perspective of I figured it out and it's now your job to understand, but to say that I'm on this journey with you and still have a long way to go in terms of being a great leader. And I want to talk about an aspect of leadership in terms of the positive side that I think is especially prevalent in today's environment. Now, some people say, is leadership development, yeah, we know it's important, but is it all that critical in terms of a company like Caterpillar? Let me try to put it in perspective for you. We get together once a year, 120 people that represent the top 120 people at Caterpillar, and we talk about our long-term strategy. Now, we talk about industry trends, we talk about competition, we talk about opening up new markets, China, India, the other, and what we're going to do to compete and win. Last year, we put a mark in the sand in terms of where we want to be in 2020. And then we broke that 2020 vision down into 3 5-year buckets, where we're going to be in 2010, 2015, and in 2020. And it really helps crystallize how important it is to build great leaders, you know, to come through the system, because this leadership profile, the top 120 people, is going to change. And it's going to change quicker than you think. That's the list of people that were at the conference. Here's what the list looks like in 2009. Here's what it looks like in 2013. Here's what it looks like in 2017. Just in case you're checking, I'm up above the percentage, so I'm not going to go away anytime soon, okay? This is based on average retirement ages in terms of predictions of when the attrition is going to take place. And this is the list in 2020. So we said as a group, talking about 2020 and what we're going to achieve, and 77% of us are going to be gone by the time it gets here. Two things to take away from that. Number one is that's the reason we broke it into 5-year chunks. You know, if you say to an organization, you've got to deliver this by 2020, most of them have the opinion, I'll be retired by then, I'm not really worried about it. So we have the goals in 2010, the here and now. But it also crystallizes the fact that the organization that is going to lead Caterpillar in the future and achieve those 2020 goals is a different group of people than we have today. In fact, for us, with the growth that we're projecting to 2020, if you take the fact that we currently have 80,000 employees, we project at 2020 we're going to need 120,000 employees, and if you take into the fact based on attrition levels that we predict, we will lose 40,000 employees between now and then. We will hire the equivalency of our current worldwide workforce in the next 15 years. So be it the people that are going to lead the company or the people that we're going to hire globally, this is a big issue in terms of making sure you attract the right people into your business, that you build the right kind of leadership profile in terms of taking your company forward. So it's one that we spend a lot of time with. So now let's get to the topic at hand, because with these kinds of numbers at Caterpillar, every other company is dealing with the same issues. So I don't know if it's going to be Cat for you, or GE, or Procter & Gamble, or the banking industry, or whatever it may be. All companies are going to have this need in terms of bringing new leadership talent through the system, okay? I guess the challenge will be is with the negative influences that are out there today, what kind of leadership force are we going to have? The point that I wanted to build the talk around is the fact that there's a lot of negative input that you deal with on a daily basis. First of all, if you take the newspapers, front page news typically murders, rapes, wars, CEOs on trial. In fact, I was flying in yesterday reading the Financial Times, and I say good news, see page 11. The reason is when Caterpillar announced their last quarter results, all-time record sales and profits, it was page 11 news. But yesterday's front page news, further turmoil grips Shanghai over graft probe. Uproar as opera is dropped due to Islamic reprisal fears. Saddam trial in uproar. Fasto jailed for 6 years for role in Enron. That's front page news. Now, I did a quality check on page 11, because that's where our good news. I thought, well, maybe there's good news on page 11. And actually, if you flip through to page 11, there is a great article about do-gooders who transform wealth's burden. And it's a story about the contributions being made in terms of Hathaway, in terms of Bill Gates, and people that are really stepping up to put money into giving foundations to have a positive impact on society. And that's page 11 news. And I think it's something that we've got to keep in mind as we set our mind, we set our mind for what kind of leader we want to become. The second one, in terms of the negative influences, I'd argue, is television. A recent study between 93 and 2001, incidents of physical violence on TV increased by almost 400%. By the age of 18, the average American child will have observed 200,000 acts of violence. If you want to do a quality check on this, go home tonight, flip on the news, and count the number of, bad news versus good news stories, and then watch 3 hours of TV and count the acts in terms of violence, sex, whatever you want to do in terms of where society is at today. And this is coming into young people day in and day out. Some people recognize it and are sensitized to it. Other people, when they see these kinds of statistics, step back and say, I hadn't really thought of that in those terms. Let's turn to music. Now, I grew up KWRT 1470 on your AM dial, some good old country music, but there are a lot of people who don't buy into that. Now, my kids give me a hard time in terms of rap music with a last name like Rapp, but Eminem, his song Kim depicts him murdering his wife. Kill, another song, describes how he plans to rape and murder his mother. His Marshall Mathers LP went straight to #1 and sold 1.7 million copies in the first week. 1.7 million copies went straight to #1. And I'd argue it's full of negative news. Let's turn to another media. Games, the internet, Grand Theft Auto, the best-selling in terms of PlayStation. Thousands of young people, unattended in most cases, playing it. And you can get your points for carjacking, stealing drugs, or beating prostitutes. 2 weeks ago, I flew to Montreal at a meeting on a Saturday, and it was 2 days after the shootings at a university in Montreal. Somebody walked in and opened up, gunfire, killed a young lady. As they got into his house, unveiled us trying to figure out why. There was a video game on the Columbine shootings that he'd been playing. I mean, what kind of society has a tragedy like the killings that took care of Columbine, and somebody went out and created a video game to emulate it? Now, I think in terms of where you're at in terms of leadership, the question that you've got to ask yourself with these kinds of challenges is your generation going to overcome the negative noise in the system and become a generation of positive leaders? I really, on behalf of Caterpillar, the shareholders, and everything else, hope so. Because I think in the business world that you're going to face when you come out with the dramatic changing environment, with the competitive intensity that's there, with the globalization of markets, we're going to need people who can lead organizations, rapidly change and move forward. And I think you only do that. I think you only do that in a very positive, direct, in terms of leadership style. What I'm going to provide you with are just some of my thoughts in terms of what positive leadership, what are some of the elements of it. And as I said earlier, I want to up front talk about the fact that from a development perspective, I have a long way to go. But at least for me, these are some of the things that have been of assistance. Number one is positive mind. In your psychology class, do you guys learn about affirmations? Cognitive dissonance? I mean, trust me, it's not just some professor trying to get you to buy into a concept that you should just forget about and move on. You know, the clear statement of who you want to become, I think, is the best thing that you can do in terms of establishing a positive outlook. Mine personally are, I have a positive romantic relationship with my wife Ann as we work together to raise 3 positive contributing kids that live by the family values. In dealing with Ann, the kids, and others, I listen and use positive and constructive language and comments. I'm a vice president at Caterpillar, known for my leadership and development skills, as well as my ability to balance home and work and build great leaders in those around me. I exercise daily, weigh my target weight of 170 with a 34-inch waist. I watch what I eat and watch what I drink as I feed this vibrant, dynamic body. The Lord has created this day. Let us rejoice and give praise. He will look out over my family, and He will look out over me. Now, I'm not here to tell you I do each and every one of those right every day. But when I do something that is inconsistent with that affirmation, you got the subconscious knocking on the door saying, hey, wait a minute. That's not who you said you wanted to be. Now, some people say, well, that's pretty easy. That's kind of who you are. And the thing that I remind them, I wrote those affirmations back in 1995, well before I was a vice president at Caterpillar. You just can't underestimate. You can't underestimate the power of a positive outlook in terms of what it's going to mean to you in terms of your business career. There was a great, I don't know, it was Harvard or Yale did a study in 1960 of 100 graduating students. Only 3 of them had written down their long-term goals and aspirations. They went back 30 years later and found that sample group of people. And those 3 that had written down their long-term goals and aspirations held over 90% of the wealth of the whole population of 100 kids. You know, this stuff is real. And it works, and I think in today's society, maybe more important than ever. The second one, learning process never ends. You're here today primarily because you get an hour's credit for participating in these sessions. And when I was here in February, I had a nice discussion with a young lady who was just finished a couple exams, very frustrated, and she openly said, I can't wait to get done with this whole studying and learning and get into the real world. And I told her, I got good news and I got bad news. The good news is the real world's fun because you get to fix real problems. The bad news is the learning never stops. And I think for your generation, more than any, the speed of change, the competition that's going to come from jobs or capabilities from other parts of the world, it's an ongoing process. And I think in terms of maintaining a positive view as a leader, it's something that you're just going to have to build into who you are. The third one is staying away from the negative input. One is to feed it with positive affirmations. The other one is not to subject it to the negative noise that's out there. So if you look at your habits, if you look at the TV that you watch, the music you listen to, one of the quality checks, if you want to be a positive leader, one of the quality checks you may want to do is what are the negative influences you're letting into your mind on a daily basis. You may be surprised. You may be surprised. So, point number one, positive mind. Point number two, positive relationships. The first one is the one that's probably nearest and dearest, if you would, to my heart, and that's work-life balance. You heard from my affirmations. I got a wonderful wife I've been married to for 23 years. I got 3 kids that mean the world to me. And there is no job at Caterpillar that is worth more than, having a great family. And I think in today's society, this is a topic that I'm really pleased is coming out on the table in terms of leadership. If you read a book like Good to Great, Jim Collins, he talks about a level 5 leader, and he talks openly in that book about they are people who have balance, that have a great home life as well as a great career. And if you're going to go out into the professional world with the idea in mind that you are going to sacrifice any and all things to achieve your goals in terms of job level or position in a company, I would offer to you it's going to be a shallow victory. And I think if you want to, in today's society, be a positive leader, figuring out work-life balance, understanding that there are more people that are important to you than just those that you work with or work for, it'd be a positive step forward. The second one is get your hands dirty. One of the things that I see in leaders is some of them develop the attitude that as they come up the ladder, that quote-unquote, they have arrived. That they no longer have to get their hands dirty. And I'd say it's the fastest way to become disconnected with the realities of your business. From my personal perspective, what does this mean? This means if I want to know what's going on the assembly line, the best way for me to understand it is to go work on the assembly line. If I want to know where we're at on a product design issue and a tough issue we're trying to solve, the best way for me to understand it is to go directly to the design engineer, not go through a filter in terms of organizations. And I think in terms of really positive leadership and motivating, if you would, a group of people, the more they understand that you're willing to walk in their shoes, to experience what they experience, I think the better luck you're going to have in terms of having them be part of your team. And the last one, in terms of the relationships, is give back. Give back to your alma mater. Give back in terms of your time. Most people, in your situation, there has been some good fortune that's led you to where you're at, be it an MBA program at the University of Missouri or whatever else you've experienced. And the old saying, you reap what you sow. I think if you want, in terms of positive leadership, positive examples for the people that are going to be around you, giving back to society, and I remain convinced every time you give, there's a multiplier effect in terms of it coming back. But I'm really pleased, as I said from the article, when you see guys like Gates and giving back to society and pressuring others to do the same. I think there's a new move afoot in terms of this type of the only thing I would encourage you as you think about that, give back not just through the money and the donations, but also through time. So positive mind, positive relationships, and then the last one I get to is positive body. Talk about diet, exercise, and a corporate athlete. One of the things that on the diet side I find interesting is one of the good news and bad news of my job is I travel the world, and a lot of times in terms of seeing great places, but it ends up being a dinner, a meeting, an airport, a new town, a new location, and there's times where that goes on for a number of days. And I've traveled in environments where I can see people who sit down, a couple drinks before dinner, big steak, baked potato, throw a little extra butter on it, finish that and say, boy, I sure do need some of that creme brulee and a little ice cream. And then on top of that, how about a couple glasses of wine, and when we finish, let's top it all off with an after-dinner drink to help it settle. I always say that's like putting a cap on a volcano. Okay? And then the next morning, when you run into these people, they say, you know what, I didn't sleep at all last night. And you wonder why. And the point I make in terms of diet or exercise, finding that 30 minutes a day that you need to get up and run, even though you're tired, even though you just flew in, even though you have other things to do, is today's world, the realities of it is, in terms of what you're going to compete in, you have to be a corporate athlete. You know, cell phones, Blackberries, laptops, the realities of it are in today's world, you can work 24 hours a day. And in terms of the competitive environment you're going to operate in, you're going to have to be very efficient and effective. I remember when I first started at Caterpillar, it was before the days of partitions. So they had a big open area, and all the desks would, be lined up, so you could see all 100 people that were working in the area that you were in. And along the side is where the big bosses sat. They had their glass offices. And I remember one individual who used to sit straight across from me. He'd walk in the morning at 8 o'clock. When he got there, his secretary had the Wall Street Journal laid out for him. And then, as he got comfortable in his chair, she would bring in his cup of coffee. He would put his feet up on the desk, read the Wall Street Journal, and drink his coffee. I tapped the young person that had hired in with me and sat next to me. I pointed to him and I said, "I want that job." The challenging part is, by the time I got there, the job had changed. In Caterpillar in 1979, the year I started, had $10 billion in sales and 91,000 employees. Today, $40 billion in sales and just over 80,000 employees. The competitive forces that are out there in terms of the people that want to win our customers or want our jobs don't afford, the same type of levels of productivity that took place back in the 1970s. And I think in terms of being a positive leader, if you want to carry that forward in terms of your future, I think understanding the fact that, it's not much different than the conditioning that you'll go through to prepare for a sporting event. I think it's the reality of what it takes in today's corporate world. Okay? So, positive mind, relationships, positive body. Now, the one thing that I go, and have discussions about is a lot of people say, well, with all these negative influences out there, I'm really pessimistic about the future. And I guess the thing that I argue over and over again, I'm not. I had a great lunch discussion, very engaging in terms of what are the issues with business today. I had a real nice discussion with Mike and his team in terms of the last class sessions and students who want to engage, want to understand, want to improve themselves, want to bring that positive, if you would, leadership in terms of the next generation. So I remain absolutely optimistic that the people such as you that are coming through the system are going to overcome the negative noise and provide positive leadership. But at the end of the day, where you fall in this is your choice and your choice only. It is all about individual accountability in terms of where you want to fall in the spectrum. There's a great author, a guy named Viktor Frankl, who wrote the book Man's Search for Meaning. He was actually in the German concentration camps. He was a trained psychologist, and the way that he survived was to turn it into a research project. And he observed people in the concentration camp, and he tried to determine what was the difference between those that survived and those that perished. And the common thread that he came up with, it was those that had something positive that they were holding on to in terms of what they wanted to do in the future were the ones that survived. And when it comes to where you fall in this, in terms of what choice you want to make, I'll leave you with one of his quotes. In that choice, the last of the human freedoms. The University of Missouri is not going to make the choice about where you fall on this issue. Your best friend's not going to turn to you and say, from your leadership style, this is how I recommend you approach it. How you go about tuning out the negative news and tuning in what or a lot of positive opportunities in terms of leadership is your choice and only your choice. My only plea is on behalf of Caterpillar, I hope you make the choice in terms of positive leader. I talked about our growth, I talked about our challenges, the number of people we're going to have to bring in. I'm absolutely convinced that while we've got a great history, the best is yet to come, and that's going to be built on, in my mind, positive leadership. So on behalf of Caterpillar, I truly appreciate your time, I appreciate your attention, and I would gladly open it up to any questions you may have. Thank you.
Nicely stated, Mr. Rapp. We have time for questions and answers. As always, I ask that your question be concise and direct. You'll have a chance for follow-up if necessary. And again, to minimize distractions, I hope that you'll stay until the conclusion of the Q&A session. Who would like to be first? And while the microphone's coming to you, I'll pose a question for Mr. Rapp. But first, we need somebody to raise his or her hand, so we have a question in line. All right. Well, while the microphone's going up, Ed, you talked about lifelong learning. Two things. What areas are you working on as far as lifelong learning? And what does Caterpillar do formally or informally with regards to leadership development?
Yeah, good question. In terms of my own personal lifelong learning, I guess I'm a big believer in 30 days makes a habit. And one of the habits, I wasn't really good when I was in college in terms of reading. In fact, I'm sure there's some professors over at Middlebush who would cringe to think that I'm speaking to a group like this. But one of the habits that I've developed that I absolutely maintain is the habit of reading. In my early days, I got into the habit of just reading business books on certain topics related to business. One of the things that my wife did convince me of is she felt that I was getting a little boring and stale, and she's my greatest critic. So I actually rotate between business book and one for personal enjoyment. But the one that, on the business book side of it, that I really do focus on, there's tons of material out there, and when you read a book, really trying to hone in on what are one or two things in that reading that you can really take forward and apply to the business. The classic example, in fact, we talked about it in Mike Christie's class before this, is the book Good to Great. There's tons of great thoughts in that book. The one that I took away that I've really worked hard to apply in business is the statement that Collins makes in the book, that it's key in terms of successful businesses moving from good to great to put brutal reality on the table with an undying sense that you will prevail. So in a business environment, I guarantee we will fail if we have people in our organization who are afraid to put reality on the table relative to a quality problem, relative to a production problem, relative to anything. And so out of that book, the thing that I've really tried to push is give me the reality. Sometimes it's painful, but give me the reality, because with that reality on the table, I'm convinced with the right set of people, you can overcome any challenge. Caterpillar from a leadership perspective, and in fact, it was the topic that I spent time with Art on when I was here in February. We have, I think, a very focused, we understand the leadership challenge that's there. We have a very, very focused leadership development program. In fact, I leave here tonight to go to Chicago to teach a part of the program tomorrow, and they offer good continuing education. After I finished up here, as you mentioned, I went back to the University of Illinois, their executive management program. And I think the thing going forward, we understand you've got to continually sharpen that saw if you're going to compete in today's marketplace. But the one thing about it, though, back to the habit, is it's the individual's accountability to develop that learning plan. You know, don't sit in a corporate environment and wait for somebody to come up and explain to you that you need to do a better job of developing yourself. That's a personal accountability that I think each and every one of us has to take full accountability for. Okay.
Okay, good. Where's our first question?
You were talking about work and life balance, personal life. When do you say enough is enough and you put work aside? Are there ever instances where you just can't do it, or how do you do it? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, it's a great question if you didn't hear it. When do you say enough is enough? How do you strike work-life balance? This is, if you look at young leaders coming through our organization today, this is the #1 issue on their mind. You know, it's funny, if you go back and you read any business book that's more than 15 years old, you won't even hear the word work-life balance uttered, because it was a sign of weakness. But in today's, if you look at Authentic Leadership, which is a great book, Good to Great, others, there's open discussion about it. When I talk about this with my people, I talk about the fact that work-life balance is not a question of doing less work. It's a question of being more efficient in the work you do. And I really break it down into 3 categories. The first one is plan your personal life with the same rigor and discipline that you do your professional life, or your personal life will suffer. You know, I find it amazing that individuals like me would go to the trouble to craft a corporate strategy, action plans, and, you know, detailed actions in terms of how you're going to achieve something, but you wouldn't take the same time to develop a strategy in terms of, you know, how you're going to spend the time with the family. You know, what are the things you really want to achieve in terms of the values that you stand for as a family? What are the core values that you believe in? And so the first thing I talk about is planning the personal life with the same rigor and discipline as the professional life. The second one is efficiency will set you free. It's back to this issue. It's not about doing less work, it's doing more work, if you the same work in a more effective way. And I'll give you an example of it. In my type of job, when you travel a lot, you can run the risks of having just meeting after meeting after meeting when you're in the office. And you know, I had a great Swiss-German secretary in Geneva who one time did an analysis of my calendar, which only a Swiss-German would do. And she came back and said, you know, Ed, one of the things I've noticed is every meeting is a minimum of an hour. You know, why don't we? And so the standard issue was, my meetings are 30 minutes. And if the person asking for a meeting says, I need an hour, Monique's response was, Ed spends a lot of time on airplanes to send him the advanced material. And if their response was, well, I don't have any advanced material, her response was, are you sure you're ready for a meeting? So those kinds of things. Another one, email. I find people today being addicted to email. You know, the BlackBerries, you've heard them, some people call them crackberries. Because, you know, I see people and they're almost like they're ready to, you know, quick draw McGraw. You know, they hear that little buzz, they got an email, you know, I got to know who it was. Well, you know, my rules on email is I touch it once. I action it, file it, forward it, or I delete it. And so those kinds of things. And then the last one that I think is very important is understanding when you have to flex for the company and when you have to flex for your family. You know, I can tell you right now, all of my vacation time for 2007 already built into the calendar. You know, there's, in Geneva, with the time difference to the US, there was a lot of times where colleagues would set teleconferences that would run late into the evenings. And, you know, you'd have a conference that just kept running on and on and on. And I'd make the comment, guys, I got a dinner outside outside the building at 7 o'clock. Is there anything else we need to resolve? And of course, the answer typically was, no, we're wrapped up. Now, the fact was the dinner was at home. But why wouldn't I have the same respect for my family as I would if I had a business colleague waiting to have dinner with me? Now, the one thing to be absolutely certain of, in terms of today's corporate environment, there will not be perfect balance between work and home on a daily basis. There's going to be periods where you get into a major acquisition, you know, you get into those kinds of things, you're going to swing way on the other side. The only thing you better be thinking about is how you're going to give back when you come out of that. So it's an ongoing challenge. Caterpillar is a company that I think understands it, promotes it. Our chairman is a great example of it. You know, and so I think I'm a bit fortunate in that regard. It's part of our corporate culture. Some other companies have different views on it, but I'm just fortunate that that's kind of Cat's outlook on it. The main issue is to be conscious of it. The people who really get caught up in the work-life balance are the ones who wake up too late and then reflect on the fact of all the things they didn't do in terms of the balance and wonder why, the family is, the divorce, the other things that come with it. Okay? No easy answer. It's the toughest thing I deal with. What else?
Next question. Here we are.
Having recently spent quite a bit of time in South Africa, I was curious how your experience in Johannesburg during that period of great turmoil affected your leadership style, and what effect did it have on Caterpillar's company, especially in South Africa?
Yeah, the one thing I would say about our time in South Africa is never believe that CNN is an accurate reflection of what's going on in the world. I remember calling home and explaining to my mom and dad that we were going to move from San Francisco, California to Johannesburg, South Africa. And, I think my dad probably thought I was crazy at that point in time. And Ann's family, it was their only 3 grandkids. And so you can imagine how much they loved their son-in-law at that point in time. But the TV was showing the conflict. If you remember, there was a truck that drove into the Trade Center, all kinds of noise. The reality, in terms of when we got there, was the people that were absolutely desperate for foreign investment in a country that they had great hope for in terms of the future. So we went with this fear in terms of, if you would, what we were going to be getting into, and we found a society that couldn't have been more welcoming in terms of what we could bring to them in terms of jobs, opportunities, those kinds of things. The thing from a professional perspective that I think probably I learned the most about, and it was the idea that I don't believe, and I'm not going to get into a political discussion in terms of what's right and wrong and different. What I do believe, though, is that from developing a country that's been oppressed, I think the more you open up to that society, the faster it will develop. I'm not a big believer in sanctions and shutdowns and those kinds of things, and we personally experienced it in South Africa. During periods of sanctions, we took a lot of grief. Every shareholder meeting, we had somebody in protesting. The issue that we had was that in the group that we had in South Africa, 120 employees, 117 of them were black South Africans. And so pulling out, who are we going to hurt? The other reality of it is we had customers that we'd been doing business with there for years who bought a machine, paid a premium with the value proposition that we were going to be there to support it. And what I learned from that is if you get into the resolve of the individuals, that's where you create change. It's not in terms of putting some pressure on a Gaddafi or others. So the more you open it up, the more, in today's society with internet, the more people can see that there is a different quality of life, there is a better standard of living. That's where I think you generate change, and that's one of the lessons that I took out of South Africa.
Good.
We had a great stay.
Other questions? Got a couple more minutes. There. Good.
What other investments do you have outside of Caterpillar?
What other investments do I have outside of Caterpillar? Well, is this the class that this gentleman's in? Well, it's a great question in that one of the things I do believe in is a diversified portfolio, and I'll tell you why. 1979, I started CAT, and I'm sitting in front of a gentleman who had been with the company for, Bill had been there 35 years, whatever. He had 100% of his investment in Caterpillar stock. Everything. Now, if you know Caterpillar history, 1980, early 80s, oil crisis, yen was 270 to the dollar. major imports coming from Japan, market collapse, pricing was down. We lost $1 billion in 3 years. Market share our price went from $72 a share down to $28 a share, and I listened to the guy behind me going through that each and every day. And so one of the things that I determined up front is I am going to carry a diversified portfolio. The reality of my job is there is very explicit targets that I need to hit in terms of ownership of CAT. If you look at the market performance that we've had, I'm really glad I had to do that. And then in terms of diversifying my portfolio on the outside, though, what I turn to is I work with a professional manager and I focus on mutual funds. And it gets a little bit back to the work-life balance issue. You know, with the hours, the travel, the things that I have to do, one of the choices I made is I'm not going to spend a bunch of time managing a portfolio of individual stocks. Because I think all of us have to realize what are we really good at and really pour your heart and soul into that, and then where can you maybe find talent to manage other aspects of your business. So most of my holdings outside of Caterpillar come in the form of mutual funds. The other place that I invest in and I'm a big believer in is real estate. Yeah.
Ed, if I could just reinforce your point about diversifying your portfolio. About 4 years ago, I visited one of our most renowned retired professors in Florida, and it was spring of 2002. And he told me very emotionally that he preached that in probably every class that he taught and violated that in his personal life because he had so much belief in one of his former proteges who had actually followed him when he'd gone to Washington, D.C. in a government position and then had been a very successful corporate executive rising to be the CEO of Enron. And he said, I guess rationally, I knew I shouldn't have so much of my portfolio in Enron, but I believed so much in Ken Lay and what he had done that I did.
Right.
And he took a very, very severe financial hit as a result of it.
Lost it all. Yeah. It's reality.
It was poignant to hear him talk about it, and it certainly reinforced it vividly.
Well, you know, one of the things I say, I've learned from a lot of people in CAT through the years, and it ranges all the way from great bosses to the guy who sits behind you. You know, I mean, you know, the life's lessons, you never know where they're going to come from.
Good. Mike?
It seems like one of the negative influences that are right before us right now is the political process, and not to cast aspersions on either the Democrats or Republicans. And yet we have so many examples of enlightened companies that try to inculcate in their employees the leadership qualities that you've expressed. Do you see any hope that perhaps the business model could infiltrate the political model and raise everybody's optimism a little bit at some point for a positive future, or what I call a future preference that maybe the greatest generation had for us that we seem to be losing for our children?
My daughters give me a hard time about running for political office, and we joke about it. In fact, I tell them that there's going to be 5 elements in terms of my political campaign. One is education, because I do think that's the root of competitive advantage. 2 is the environment. We're going to have to figure it out in terms of what we're going to do. 3, we need a good energy policy. 4, we got to deal with the extremists. And 5, if you want those 4, vote for Ed. Okay? But that's as far as that discussion's going to go. And I think in terms of the political system we have today and the lack of what I'm used to dealing with in terms of a business environment. What I love about our business, we set a strategy, agree on the goals and objectives, and then get after it in terms of implementation. I just don't see that clarity in terms of being able to execute like that in today's political system. I think the other thing, back to the topic for the day, the other thing I would not do in terms of anybody wanting to enter that political realm on a national scale is subject myself, my family, to the negative news, the negative advertising, the people that are going to publish things that may or may not be true, and if it isn't true, the retractions on page 15. The people who do it for the good of giving in public service, I hold them in the highest regards, because I'm just not sure I could do it. I just don't see government reform right now that's getting after that issue. And I think the basic premises of business apply in a political sense. You chart a very clear direction in terms of where you want to go, clearly outline the objectives that you want to achieve, and then you marshal the resources, the masses to take you in that direction. But in terms of today's political scene, without siding one party or the next, I just don't see those issues getting debated. The biggest issue being debated is, the campaign financings and how much money can you spend to do negative advertising. So I'm not overly optimistic. I do think businesses, though, have an accountability to engage in the policies required to allow us to be competitive. And that's one CAT takes very seriously. We spend a lot of time in Washington talking about trade, talking about education, talking about workers' rights, those kinds of things. I think that's where we can have an impact. Okay, so that's the end of my political speech, all right?
We have time for a final question. Do we have one? There we are.
Since you spent so much time abroad and you said it's a global society or a global economy now, what advice would you give to people graduating to succeed in that economy?
Yeah, my advice in terms of people that are finishing up, getting close to graduating is, first of all, is take every advantage of the opportunities that exist to experience the cultures from outside the U.S. I had a good discussion today in terms of lunch and some of the people that actually gone to Italy and part of your study abroad program. So I think you've got to, one, take advantage of those opportunities. Second thing is to, when you do that, take full advantage of it in terms of what I talk about as unpack your bags. One of the things I see in terms of some Americans traveling abroad is they want to take their American habits, take them to Europe, and then get frustrated when everybody doesn't want to adapt to their way of doing things. If you really want to develop in terms of the global society what it takes to compete, I think you've got to immerse yourself into that local culture when you do take advantage of it. I was telling the class before this, the issue of cultural diversity and competing in a global environment would be another great topic to discuss, because by staying overseas long enough, I think I had a little bit of I'm maybe a little slow learner in terms of the understanding of cultural diversity. When I first went to Europe, my first phase of development was, why don't you do it my way? It'd be a lot easier, because everybody had a different opinion, be it the French, the Germans, the Italians, or whatever. I finally figured out that approach wasn't going to work. And so phase 2 of my development was understanding the differences of opinions in terms of a way a French versus an Italian versus someone from the Nordic countries look at issues. But phase 3, the one that I think really plays for companies that are going to be the winners in a global environment, is to understand that diversity is a strength, not a weakness. It's a business opportunity, not an obligation or a quota. The realities of it is, if you sit down and make a decision, and I have my view of how it ought to be, and I have a leadership team that looks at things from a different perspective, I have the ability to uncover blind spots, things I never thought of, local issues in terms of local cultures that do make a difference in terms of business. And I think that's sometimes what we, and I put myself in that category, want to take too much of our management style overseas as opposed to really going to understand what are the strengths of that cultural diversity. And I think that's what's going to differentiate American companies with international operations versus companies that truly do become global. And I think the global ones are going to be the ones that win. So unpack your bags, understand that local culture, and really learn from that. as opposed to doing industrial tourism, if you would. Okay?
Good. Thank you, Ed. Thank you. I think we've identified the topic for Mr. Rapp's next talk on cultural diversity, so we'll give you a chance. I have a plaque for you. It reads, College of Business, University of Missouri, Columbia, in appreciation to Edward J. Rapp, Dean's Distinguished Lecture, September 28, 2006. Thank you, Ed. Thank you very much. And we always have to send our visitors away with some black and gold, so let's see what's in the bag here, all right?
Well, the truth of it is, when Dean Walker and I first talked, I told him I would actually come back when the Tigers were 4-0.
Yeah.
So congratulations on that.
Yeah.
Outstanding. I'll wear it with great pride.
Good. Thank you. A reception for Mr. Rapp will begin in just a moment or two in room 105. In fact, we're going to escort him over there. So if you'd like to have a chance for some one-on-one conversation, please join us. Thank you all for coming today. We are adjourned. Great.